You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Filmmaking Conversations with Damien Swaby. Listen to conversations with award-winning filmmakers, directors from the golden age of television, and creatives from the indie film community who continue to inspire the next generation of filmmakers. And now, over to your host, Damien Swaby.
Today on Filmmaking Conversations, I speak to Katherine Imp, a lawyer and a filmmaker. She is a partner in DLA Piper, a global law firm. From the creative burst behind the camera to the high-stakes negotiations in the boardroom, Katherine gives us a rare peek behind the curtain into the life of production counsel and the delicate dance of drafting agreements that turn stories into screen magic. We'll explore the pressing intellectual property issues reshaping the digital media landscape and unlock the mysteries of film finance law. Katherine will share invaluable strategies for content creators navigating the torrents of IP protection and offer golden nuggets from her lectures to the legal eagles and film visionaries at USC Gold School of Law and Marshall School of Business as we dive deep into the legal mechanisms that ensure creatives and filmmakers' rights are safeguarded in the fast-paced world of film and television. This episode of Filmmaking Conversation is where the art of storytelling meets the letter of the law. Katherine, how are you today?
I'm good.
Thank you. Good to hear that you're good, and thanks for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. Bear with me. My throat is going through a bit of a situation at the moment, but it should be able to last.
No worries at all. I have 2 little ones, so I get it.
Okay, fair enough. So, obviously, I've read a lot about you. I've seen you on YouTube as well, and all fabulous, great stuff. So it was brilliant that you've decided to come on the podcast. I thank you for that.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Anytime, and your career has taken a fascinating trajectory from documentaries to production to entertainment law. What sparked the shift, and how have your origins in filmmaking influenced your legal work?
It's a good question, and I definitely have kind of an interesting career path, but, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and so I went to law school, and I came out of law school still not really sure, what area of law I was most interested in. But one thing I did know is that outside of the practice of law, I really enjoyed filmmaking. And I made my own documentary about hiking the Appalachian Trail to kind of further that interest. And as I started practicing law, I started meeting people, and they said to me, "You know what, Kate, why don't you just combine your interest in entertainment with your law degree?" I was like,
Amazing.
that's not a bad idea. And so once that light bulb, kind of went off, I started on this path of kind of transitioning my legal practice. I had started in litigation in Chicago and transitioning that to transactional entertainment work in Los Angeles. And that's where I am today.
Amazing. So who are these people that were giving you that advice? Because traditionally, for example, family may say, "Hey, you've been to law school. We need you to just concentrate on being the best lawyer you possibly can be." So who was saying to you, "You know what, why don't you be a lawyer and be someone working in filmmaking?"
So it's a couple things. And I think my story just goes to show how important mentors are and champions are in no matter what career that you have. For me, it was coming from 2 places. One, I was in Chicago, and there's a really great independent film community there. And so I was
Okay.
meeting those people because I had this documentary, and I didn't go to school for film. So I had to learn from these folks and learn how to take this footage and turn it into a film, and then take that film and turn it into something that people could see. And so as I was doing that, a lot of these people I was meeting, I was the only lawyer that they knew, right? And so, they would start to ask me questions about entertainment. And that was my first kind of introduction into that, where I didn't really necessarily have answers to that, but I cared about these folks that I was meeting, and I would do my best to find answers for them and help them in any way I can. So this was kind of going on outside of me practicing law. And then within the firm that I was at the time, the managing partner of that firm came to me one day and she said to me, I know you have this interest in entertainment. Everyone at the firm did because there was articles, in the news about it in Chicago. I wasn't afraid to kind of share this piece of my life and this thing that was really important to me. And so she was the one that said, why don't you put together a business plan and bring it to me and about how you're going to do this, how you're going to transition from this litigation work to transactional entertainment while still doing everything you're supposed to do as an employee of this law firm.
Wow.
Right? Filling all the hours that you need to do and doing everything you're supposed to do. And, that's what I did. And I think that is someone that's a true mentor. It wasn't necessarily in her best interest to do that, right? Because that would
Mm.
result in one of her, you know, stellar employees eventually leaving the firm. But I think she saw that I had potential if I could kind of find the right space for me. And so that's what I did. And so I did some research. I met other entertainment lawyers that were in Chicago. I went to CLEs, which are like training programs for lawyers that were specific to entertainment. I bought books and I studied them as if I was in law school. Right. So
Nice.
I did all of these things to move myself in that direction. And then one of the last things I did that really kind of helped me to finish this transition was I started doing pro bono work. And so Chicago has a really great organization called Lawyers for the Creative Arts. And it's an organization that helps, producers of film content that perhaps don't have the means to hire an expensive lawyer from DLA Piper, but need help, right? And so that's what I did. I was kind of spending my days still doing litigation as I was asked to do, but then I was also taking on pro bono work that was in the space that I was interested in, which meant that I could help my friends that I was meeting. I could also help other people that I hadn't yet met, but that I met through that organization and start to really determine, is this what I want to do? And I confirmed that it was. So after all those different champions and kind of that legwork that I did, after all that, I quit my job and I moved to Los Angeles.
Your documentary, what is it called and what is it about?
Yeah. So in between law school and practicing law, I made a documentary about through hiking the Appalachian Trail. And for those of you listening that don't know what the word through hiking means, it means that you are hiking a long distance trail at one time. So you're not doing sections of it over a period of years. You're starting and you're finishing. So the Appalachian Trail goes from Georgia to Maine, and I did it in one long haul. It took
Wow.
about 5 months. I did it with a friend of mine and my brother. And while we did the hike, we filmed it. And so that documentary is called Beauty Beneath the Dirt.
Excellent. Where is it available for us to watch?
And you can watch it on a handful of different platforms. You can definitely find it on Amazon and a few others. And yeah, it's still near and dear to my heart. Now it's over 10 years ago, but a
Wow.
really important part of my life, my friend's life, my brother's life. I think when you look back on your life, you think of, what are your biggest accomplishments?
Mm.
And uh, becoming a partner at DLA Piper, definitely a big accomplishment, but through hiking the Appalachian Trail is all the way up there as well.
When you were doing pro bono work, can you give us a glimpse into the day-to-day responsibilities of production counsel and the art of drafting and negotiating agreements for films and shows?
Absolutely. So when I initially started with the pro bono work, it often came in the form of being asked to review one document, right? One producer agreement, one shopping agreement, something along those lines. And so at that stage, I was new to all this, right? So I would kind of take this on. I'd look at the books and things that I had already been studying. And I'd also call up the entertainment lawyers that I had already met. And I would ask questions to make sure that I was, giving proper legal advice to these pro bono clients of mine. And so when you're doing it in that context, that's the way it looks. You're not seeing kind of the full breadth of what production looks like. You're just kind of helping with one particular contract. As I continued in my career, I once I'd moved to Los Angeles, I spent some time at a production legal firm, but before coming to the firm that I'm at now. And there I got to see truly what production looks like and what it looks like from the angle of being production counsel. And so from a, I guess, bird's eye view, that means doing all of the contracts from development to financing to production to distribution. And sometimes those things happen all at the same time. And sometimes they're in a particular sequence, and sometimes they're out of order in a different sequence. But that's part of being production counsel.
So, as these digital platforms transform the way we consume media, what intellectual property issues should content creators be most aware of? And what strategies can they employ to protect their work?
So it's a good question. I think, you know, it depends what side you're on, right?
Mm,
So I think if you are listening and you're on the producer side, you're a production company, right? Then you're always going to try and get all the rights you can, right? So that
yeah.
you can exploit content in all different forms of media, now known or, hereafter devised is the language that we would use, right? So a lot of times these contracts are made at a particular time and then 10 years the technology changes. And so, what we do and what I did as production counsel is I would make sure, especially with producers and production companies, that we had a really broad grant of rights so that if things came up that we couldn't possibly contemplate at that time, we still had those rights. On the flip side, if you're listening and you're a creator, then you're probably going to do the opposite. You're really going to try to limit the grant of rights to the exact thing that the producer needs, whether, it's a particular film or using your intellectual property in connection with a podcast, whatever it is, but limiting it to just those needs and then retaining all of their rights. And then as technology changes and there's more ways to exploit your IP, you now hold on to those rights and you can continue to monetize those rights.
So obviously you're clearly incredibly knowledgeable about all of this. That goes without saying. So with all of this knowledge you have, sharing your knowledge as a guest lecturer must be incredibly rewarding. Can you share some of the key points from your lectures that aspiring filmmakers and lawyers at UCS Guild School of Law and Marshall School of Business would benefit from?
Yes. So I have been always enjoyed teaching and so I'm also practicing law full time, so I can't be a professor full time, but the way that I've kind of incorporated that love of teaching is guest lecturing in other people's classes, and I've been
Mm,
doing that for a number of years, sometimes at the undergraduate level and sometimes at the law school level. But in any event, it's always a class that's either related to entertainment or entrepreneurship or some kind of combination thereof. Because I think in the entertainment business, you absolutely have to be an entrepreneur. And so
yeah.
it's important to understand what that means and what those skills are and how you kind of grow that skill set and toolkit. And so that is kind of what I have taught over the years. I usually go through the basics, very basics of intellectual property, in particular copyright, since the folks I'm talking to want to be in the entertainment industry, and that's the most important type of intellectual property in our space. And then, I'll also go over different business entities and why a lot of films are created within a single purpose vehicle, like a single purpose limited liability company or and kind of talk about those things. But I also talk about my journey. As we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, I have I understand the importance of conversations with people and mentorship, and a lot of the ideas that I've had about my own career came from doing coffees and lunches and drinks
Mhm.
with other people who have been around longer than me and had more wisdom than me, and it helped to kind of spark ideas for my own career. And so I see my guest lecturing as a way to do that for students as well. And actually last year I officially added adjunct professor to that list. So at USC Gould, I now teach my own class once a year in the spring, and it's called Digital Media Transactions. So I talk about the different types of media that exist and kind of like we're talking about here, how to protect that media, how to license it, how to acquire it. And we go over those details while also learning how to negotiate and draft contracts.
What inspired you to be an entrepreneur?
You know, I I feel like you're innately an entrepreneur, and it's only as you kind of start to grow up and have different experiences that you realize that you are one.
Mm.
or maybe you don't even realize it, but other people around you realize it, and they're like, this is who you are. And I think at its I guess, most basic, an entrepreneur is someone that is not afraid to take risks and, make change in order to go after their dreams. And, a lot of times an entrepreneur may be someone that actually has their own business, has their own production company, or is a freelance writer or director. These are all entrepreneurs. But I also see myself as an entrepreneur even now working at a major law firm. I think, I every day come in and I figure out what I want my business to look like, what I want my clients to look like, what I want my work to look like, and make conscious decisions if I feel like I'm moving in a direction that I don't want to go in. And I think that's what entrepreneurs are and what they're good at. I'm not saying that they do it right every time, but I think that's one of those skills is that you realize if you have made a wrong choice, it's okay, and you figure out what the next choice is to get where you wanna go.
And what type of decisions do you make when you're thinking about what your clients are going to look like?
So, at my core, I think one thing to think about when you talk to people and they say, "I am an entertainment lawyer," I think the next question you ask them is, "What type of entertainment lawyer are you?" Because there's a number of different types of entertainment law, just as there'd be a number of different types of corporate lawyers and tax lawyers, right? They're going to have a very specific expertise within that world. And so for me in entertainment, my specialty is intellectual property, right? So doing commercial transactions, and that could be on behalf of producers and production companies, and like we've been talking about here, helping them to exploit their intellectual property or to acquire intellectual property of third parties. But I also sometimes help individuals who could be celebrities, athletes, influencers who, are using their money to invest in projects in the entertainment space or are using their status to, partner with a brand and do an endorsement deal or some other kind of influencer arrangement. So, I think when I think about the work that I want to take on, I make sure that it's that area that I know that I'm interested in. But sometimes you just connect with people. And if I find another entrepreneur that I really like, but what they need is not what I do, then I still will, if I can, do 2 things. Either 1, try and find a way that we can still work together at DLA Piper, but maybe it's bringing in one of my colleagues who have the expertise that they need, right? Or if my firm really just isn't a right fit, we're an expensive firm, we're a global firm, there's a
Yeah,
number of filmmakers out there that wouldn't be able to afford DLA Piper, then I'll try and find a place for them to go. Maybe one of those firms that I used to work at, right, that are smaller. Their rates are lower, but they still are doing really great work in this space. And so that's what I think about, every day as I'm considering new clients. Is it a right fit here for me and my colleagues? And if not, is there a place that I can send them so they can get the work
excellent.
they need?
That's very, very nice. And with a constantly evolving media landscape, how do you see the intersection of finance and legal practices adapting to support the future of entertainment?
It's definitely here's what I'll say. I think, you know, financing and entertainment has changed a lot with the rise of streaming platforms, but there's
Mhm.
also very traditional models of financing that still exist. And so what I mean by that, I would say the newer kind of financing model that many of you listening are aware of, right, would be if a streaming platform is interested in a particular type of content, then they might finance it entirely, right? And say, here, go make this thing. If it's a film, a limited series, short, whatever it is, we're going to own it. And, we're going to fund it for you and we're going to end up distributing and making sure that that story is told throughout the world. But the upside for the producer or the production company is lower, right? Because there's lower risk. That old saying, high risk, high reward, low risk, low reward. I think that's true in the entertainment space. So if you have a streamer that is funding it, then everyone will kind of come out having been paid for their services and maybe made a little bit on top of that. but then you walk away and you start with your next project. I think in the old kind of traditional way of financing, it looked a little bit different, right? Where a producer or production company might hold on to their intellectual property and find independent financing to create, to turn that intellectual property into a piece of content and then license that content to third party distribution platforms. And there's still a lot of that happening, but it's riskier, right? Because you could end up financing a piece of content. And then when it comes time to license or sell that content to a third party, what they're offering doesn't cover the budget.
Yeah.
It definitely doesn't cover profits that everybody, was hoping to make. And that happens a lot. That happens a lot in this industry. But then there's also those times where you have small independent projects that really knock it out of the park. And that's where that high risk, high reward comes in. Everybody's made whole. The investors get their money back and then some. And then everyone that's kind of participating in future revenues also see more money. So you have both models that still exist. And I don't think either of those are going anywhere anytime soon.
Okay, great. And reflecting on the documentaries that have crossed your desk, could you share an instance where the legal complexities were particularly challenging and how you got through that situation?
Yes. So, documentaries are interesting. I think, also of all the different types of projects that we're talking about today, documentaries are ones that also might be funded through grants, right? Or through other forms of financing instead of an equity financier or a debt financier. You might also have contributions that are funding the budget in a different way. So the financing can be a little bit complex. But then on the other side, talking about intellectual property, talking about releases and things that you need to produce a documentary, I think producers have to really be more kind of cognizant of the world around them, right?
Mm.
Because when you're making scripted content, it's all staged. You know what's there, you know what's coming, you know what people are going to say because it was decided in advance. When it comes to documentary, you're oftentimes, in a real place where there's real elements that need to be dealt with, real people who don't know what they're going to say. And so, I think there's kind of a even higher level of humanity that needs to be taken into consideration when making a documentary, that you're working with real people, oftentimes not even actors, and thinking about not just what you're trying to capture and what it means to you, but also sit in the shoes of the people that are on camera and what does this mean to them. And I think that's a little bit of a unique thing about documentaries. Even more, I would even put reality TV in a different bucket than documentaries,
Okay.
right? Because even reality TV, yes, you have real people and you need to consider them, and but it's still a little bit staged, you know.
Yeah.
Documentary,
Yeah.
it's real people who have invited you into their worlds, and I think there's an additional kind of level of respect that you have to provide to them for that.
And personally, how do you feel about reality TV? Is it something you would watch at home after dinner or?
Well, since I've got 2 little ones at home, most of what happens after dinner is watching Frozen on repeat.
Okay.
But, but, there's a handful of reality television, shows that I love, as I think everyone does, whether they would admit it or not. My number 1 favorite has always been, as you can imagine, the show Survivor. I've watched
Mhm.
it since I was a kid, and of course, it's inspired my trek on the Appalachian Trail.
Excellent, excellent. Survivor, that's one that we get over here in the UK, that's for sure. And the role of production counsel is crucial yet multifaceted. Can you tell us when the process of due diligence in rights acquisition, sorry, and what the level of responsibility is?
Sure. So, I think that no matter what the type of content, even documentary and podcasts and those types of content, you have to consider the chain of title right from the beginning as production counsel. And so, for those of I think most of you listening probably know what chain of title is, but it's essentially all of the kind of underlying rights that are required to produce content. And so you could probably put that into 4 buckets. One, you're thinking about, I guess, other than maybe a documentary or reality show, a script, right? So who has the rights to this script that we are basing this content on, and how do we get it? And then two, is the script based on anything, right? Is it based on real people? Is it based on already existing intellectual property, like a book? And so you have to consider that IP and who owns that and how do we get those rights and what rights are we asking for? The other piece that people forget about when it comes to chain of title, but absolutely production council thinks about it, is you have to make sure, even if you have those contracts, that rights are actually being transferred from the party who owns the intellectual property to the one who is acquiring it. And that's usually done through a form of payment, right? And once that payment is made, then those rights are transferred. So then, as production counsel, you want to think, well, do we have proof that that payment was made? And so that's part of chain of title as well. Want to make sure that there's actually proof that payment was made to the intellectual property holder, officially transferring rights to the producer or production company. And then the last thing that you think about when it comes to chain of title is, especially when it comes to projects that change hands over time, is that you need to make sure that the ultimate copyright holder of the film or the television show or whatever it is actually holds the copyright to all those underlying agreements, right? And so that might require an assignment agreement from one party to another. And so you really have to kind of look at it as a production council, look at all those different documents and which entity entered into them, and then ultimately which entity actually needs to hold those rights, and put assignment agreements in place until we ultimately get all rights into the right hands. And then in the US, I guess, UK, I'm sure as well, we make sure that we register it with the US Copyright Office so that the world is put on notice of who owns the copyrights in the project and the underlying material.
And sorry, say that again for me who didn't quite catch it. The US copyright.
Yeah,
What
so
is?
in the US, we often suggest that in addition to the film or the television show or whatever type of content, we also want to make sure that we are registering the underlying script or
Oh,
underlying material with the Copyright Office.
sure.
In the US, that does provide a number of statutory protections that to the now owner of that content that you wouldn't have if you hadn't registered it. So oftentimes you'll when I am production counsel and I start to get information, I'll see that maybe a script has already been registered, but now that script is changing hands. You'll still look at all the things that have already happened before that date, and then you will record those additional assignments to make sure that if someone was searching on the US copyright database, that they would see who owns the copyright and how to reach out to them if you had to.
I see. And I'm guessing that can be done digitally now, or is it
Yeah,
still okay? Okay.
they can by going to copyright.gov. And I often have producers, creators too, ask me, where do you start if you are looking to license or acquire rights to intellectual property that already exists? And how do you know who owns it? Right.
Mhm.
And so I usually would say, obviously, Google is great. IMDb Pro is great, but also the Copyright Office. Because if you know, the owners of the IP did their job, then likely they have registered their intellectual property with that Copyright Office, and therefore you'll be able to see the history of it, and also you'll have contact information for the person that owns it or their lawyer. But that often helps with chain of title because if you're looking to option or shop a book, for example, you might not know who actually owns the rights to the book, especially if the author, for example, passed away or something like that. So the Copyright Office can be helpful in starting that search.
Excellent. I mean, your passion for law is screaming through the screen. It's amazing. And you still made a documentary. What inspired you in that way to make this documentary the way you did? Because many people make a short, small documentary at first. They might make something locally that's affected them or something that's happened in their family, and you get a 10-minute short or something along those lines. You went full out with your brother and someone else to make a documentary. What was in your head sorting all of that out? Because you've got development pre-production, production, post-production. There's a lot to go through. So how did you take this all on board, and how did it make you feel?
So I have to say that after going through the process, I have so much respect for filmmakers because it is very difficult to take a concept and turn it into something that people can see. There's so many things, even with a documentary, that you don't think of until you're in it, right?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I knew that, I had a love for outdoor adventure. I had a love for entertainment, and I just and I had some time before I was going to start practicing law, and I saw the Appalachian Trail and a documentary about the Appalachian Trail as a way to combine all of those interests. And I at the time, right, I wasn't quite sure what my interest in entertainment was, right? Because it wasn't until later that the light bulb went off about being an entertainment lawyer. I just knew in my gut that there was something about it that I loved. I loved that this was a medium for people to tell stories. And so I think there was a few things that I did there that I have done in all aspects of my career, which is I knew what I didn't know, right? And I started asking people questions. So since I didn't go to film school, I thought, well, at the time I was at University of Illinois and I was at the law school there, but I was like, they must have a film department. So then I reached out to the professors that were in that department. I said, hey, I'm going to make a documentary. I don't know anything about it. Would you mind taking a half an hour to talk to me and give me some advice. And so there were a number of conversations like that happened. My brother did the same thing at the university that he was at. We found friends of friends of friends, right, that were in some way connected to the industry that could give us some advice about what camera equipment to get, how to save, the footage that we
Yeah.
were getting right on the trail and then make sure that it didn't get damaged by rain,
Mhm.
and the
Yeah.
elements,
Yeah.
right? There's a number of things, especially when you're talking about a documentary. It's not like you then go put it in the cabinet, like you put it in your backpack that's getting rained on. So there were a number of things like that we had to think about. And the way that I got that information was by seeking advice. And you'd be surprised that sometimes all it takes is just asking and people say yes. And I do the same thing in my career now. When I have students that reach out and want to talk for a half an hour, I say yes, because you never know when that kind of 30-minute conversation, it's only 30 minutes for me, but it could be invaluable for the person that you're talking to. And these people that I talked to create that documentary, that information was invaluable.
Gosh, I could imagine. I really could. And did they get the chance to see the documentary? And if they did, what did they think of it?
Yeah, they did, and I think, some of the reactions I got from folks that saw it, including friends and family in my own life, they're like, "Wow, that's better than I thought it would be." I was like, "Well, I appreciate that, and I'm glad you had a low bar for me."
I love the honesty from them. I really do. I love it. And DLA Piper has achieved a revenue of 3.68 billion in 2022. How does such financial strength support and facilitate the firm's work with filmmakers, especially when dealing with legal complexities?
Yeah, so DLA Piper is a monster of a firm. We're
Mm,
global, we're in 40 different countries. I Thousands and thousands of people are employed, lawyers, and then everybody that assists and supports the lawyers here. And we have every different type of expertise, right? So when you're looking for corporate work and tax work and intellectual property work and entertainment work within intellectual
yeah.
property, it's here. I think what I have noticed from DLA, because I have switched firms a few times,
Okay.
this is truly an entrepreneurial firm, which I mean, I guess that goes to show why I ultimately found my way here and have stayed here now for some time, because I feel that connection as someone that is an entrepreneur. And what I mean by that is that even though there's so many of us, we're all connected and helping each other to help each other's clients in whatever expertise is needed. So on any given day, I might be engaging with my colleagues in Italy. I might be
Okay.
engaging with my colleagues in Australia because I've got a client who's, deciding to film something there and I need the expertise of somebody that's boots on the ground in that country. I also find within the United States that on a daily basis, I'm constantly working with my employment colleagues, my corporate colleagues, because I think what you start to realize as you practice law, especially in entertainment, intellectual property issues and particularly entertainment issues is only one facet of what you need to understand, especially if you are on the producer or production company side. You might have employees, and then you need to understand how to employ them and
Okay.
comply with applicable law. You might have multiple entities that you need to create in order to protect all of your intellectual property. Now you're starting to get into corporate work. So I think DLA Piper has done a really good job of facilitating kind of cross collaboration among practice areas so that it's seamless for the client. They just come to me, they say, "Here's what I need." And I'll say, "I'll get that for you." And the next day, I will find the right person that can answer those questions in that country. And I'm able to kind of connect in maybe 2 degrees of separation to the person that can answer those questions for the client. I love that about DLA. I guess one other thing I'd say is that when you look at big firms, and DLA is a big firm, right? There's other types of firms out there. Like I said, you have those small production legal shops, which are really great, but that's what they do. That's all they do, right? Is production legal counsel. And you also have talent firms, and that's what they do, right? They represent individual people rendering their services in connection with different types of content. When you're talking about a place like DLA Piper, that's a big firm, most of these big firms in the entertainment space, they do have some kind of practice that involves finance. So there's finance attorneys in the entertainment space and there's corporate attorneys in the entertainment space, but they don't always have me and my expertise. They
Mm.
don't necessarily have those kind of production specialists or intellectual property specialists. And so I think that's one of the things that I've truly loved about being at DLA is that we can provide all three to clients, not just the financing and corporate work, but we can also say, "Hey, you can also use us to negotiate those deals with respect to your intellectual property."
Excellent. And lastly, when will we see a new documentary from you?
Yeah, I feel like after that experience, and I'm sure many of you listening who have created your own content probably at some point felt the same way. I thought, "I'm never doing that again. I am never making a film again. I am never hiking a long distance trail again. I'm never going outside again." Those are some of the things that I was thinking after that experience. But time passes, right? And you start to
Mhm.
forget the difficulties of making content or hiking a long trail, and your brain starts thinking again, right, about what you want to do. And so I think, right now I'm in that space where I'm here to service my clients and the projects that they're making, and I'm here to be a mom and to
Yeah,
little ones. But I think in the next chapter of my life, I absolutely could see myself getting back to where I started, which is thinking about stories that I really wanna tell and finding the right medium to tell them, and I don't know about being on camera again, but at least being a producer of that content.
excellent. Well, I hope in the next chapter I'm able to see what you come up with. And thank you so much again for coming on Filmmaking Conversations.
No problem. Thank you for having me.